Jesus predicted escalating chaos and then said, "Don't be alarmed, this isn't the end." We're studying Mark 13:3-8, and there's a lot to see. Let's read verses 3 and 4 from the ESV. "And as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, 'Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when all these things are about to be accomplished?' First, where are they?" Jesus and his team are on the Mount of Olives, which is in direct line of sight of the temple. Mark tells us Jesus is seated opposite the temple. In our previous study of verses 1 and 2, as they were leaving the temple, Jesus predicted its utter destruction. Now, he's traded the Temple Mount for the Mount of Olives. They're seated opposite the temple, but the context is still temple-centric. How can we know it's still temple-centric? The question that Jesus is asked will tell us. But first, who is asking the question? Peter, James, John, and Andrew have a question. These are the 4 fishermen, the first 4 people Jesus called to follow him as disciples. The ones who have been with him the longest and have seen the most, and 3 of them have been separated by Jesus to bear witness to significant events, like the raising of Jairus' daughter and the Transfiguration. They come to Jesus with a question, and Mark says they asked him privately. There's a small technical nugget that is informative here. The phrase translated privately is literally according to their own, or in reference to their own. So, what does that mean? It means that the question isn't private in the sense of who can hear it being asked and answered. It means that this is a question that arose within the group of 4 fishermen. They didn't ask on behalf of the larger group. It was their own question. Okay, finally, we can get to the question. When will these things be, and what will be the sign when all these things are about to be accomplished? Notice it is a 2-part question. First, when will these things be? Or, when shall these things happen? Wait a minute. What things? What things are they asking about? That brings us back to what Jesus said in verse 2. "Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." Their question is directly related to that prediction. How can we be sure? Because of the setting, sitting directly opposite the temple, and the lack of any intervening events or conversations between verses 2 and 3. They are surely asking, when will the temple complex be thrown down to such an extent that no 2 stones will remain stacked on one another? And the second part of the question asks for one, singular, vital piece of information. And what will be the sign when all these things are about to be accomplished? They ask for the singular sign that will let them know the destruction is about to happen. Not multiple signs. That's important. Let's look at verse 5. "And Jesus began to say to them, 'See that no one leads you astray.'" Before Jesus gives any answer to their 2-part question, he begins with a warning for them. "See that no one leads you astray." Earlier in Mark, Jesus warned them to beware of the teaching of the scribes. In both instances, Jesus is quoted using the word blepiti, which means keep looking or keep watching. It's like saying, stay on guard. Here, they're told to keep watching so no one leads them astray. In a recent video, we talked about the Greek word for leading astray and how it gave us the English word planets. If a sailor used planets to navigate instead of stars, he would be led off course, because the positions of planets aren't fixed in the sky. Jesus' warning to them is to keep your eyes open, keep watch, so that you aren't misled by anyone. So Jesus expressed a concern that was more important than the answer to their question. Specifically, the danger of deceptive influences. What kind of influences? Look at verse 6. "Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray." Jesus said many would come. So it's not a small threat. It's pervasive. And they would come in his name. The deceivers will come, invoking his name to gain access and influence over his followers. And more than that, they will claim that they are him. And Jesus said this tactic would be very effective, and many would be led astray. If they navigate fixed on these false Christs, they'll surely be led off course. History tells us that in the first century, after the resurrection and ascension of Christ, many people claimed to be him and drew followers to themselves for short periods. Now that he's warned them about the dangers of deceivers, we get the answer to their question. Well, sort of, in verse 7. And when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is not yet. Please take note of the verb at the beginning of Jesus' answer. When you hear. In other words, there will be talk, and you will hear it. It will be about wars and rumors of wars, of actual wars and potential or impending wars. Then he tells them, do not be alarmed or troubled. Think about his prediction of temple destruction from verse 2. For that massive complex to be destroyed, one would have to assume a cataclysmic event, which is what ultimately happened in 70 AD when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. It makes sense that they would expect war to be a part of the destruction predicted in verse 2. But Jesus said, don't be alarmed. It is necessary for those things to happen. They must take place, but the end is not yet. In other words, the wars and talk of wars are not the sign that you asked about. It is not the end yet. What end? It is very tempting to launch into an apocalyptic interpretation of this passage and start talking about the end of the world, etc., and there's certainly a place for that. But in the context of Mark chapter 13 so far, all the internal evidence points to a concern about the predicted end of the temple. So for our purposes studying Mark, we'll focus there, at least for now. Let's move on to verse 8. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. These are but the beginning of the birth pains. So they can expect lots of human conflict, nations and kingdoms rising against each other, but they can expect other things too, that aren't human in origin, like earthquakes in various places. Note, there's no mention of any specific places. Why not? Human nature being what it is, they would surely create an earthquake watch list to signal the end. There would also be famines, a lack of food, leading to more conflict and misery. In the ancient world, famines were often believed to be a judgment or punishment by a deity. A failed growing season was attributed to God's displeasure. And then Jesus gives them the most significant part of his answer. These are but the beginning of the birth pains. I have never been pregnant, but I have 3 children, and I understand that birth pains, associated with contractions, signal that the main event is coming. The pains are not the main event, but they make it very plain that the unstoppable and inevitable process of the main event is underway, and birth pains are progressive in frequency and intensity. So why did Jesus choose this awesome metaphor? Because they specifically asked for the sign that his prediction was about to be fulfilled. But he wanted them to know that it didn't come down to a single sign. Instead, it would be a process that escalated until it reaches a pinnacle, and that no single event in the process should cause them alarm, because they were necessary steps along the way. And please remember, before telling them any of that, Jesus stressed the importance of being on guard and keeping watch for deceivers who would lead believers astray. In an atmosphere filled with many deceivers, it will be necessary to exercise discernment. If you don't, you'll be like a dog at a whistler's convention, constantly running after noise. And the noise will lead you off course. Jesus isn't done, but our time is running long, so we'll pick up with more of Jesus' answer to their question in the next video. What can we take away from this passage? It is natural to want information, and the more details, the better. It was natural after hearing that the temple was doomed to destruction to want to know what sign to look for. It's natural for us to look at our world and wonder where the hands of the clock are, because it sure feels late. But Jesus' primary concern wasn't that the disciples should know the sign. It was for them to exercise discernment, avoid the influence of deceivers, and understand that the process, like labor, will move at its own pace until it is time for the big event. Thanks for studying with me. What was your favorite part of this video?